Okay, election 2019, plots, pacts and possibilities. Robert, we've got this great electoral fight coming on December the 12th, but already there are suspicions of what I suppose you might call a bit of match fixing up front, because one of the features of the first few days has been the attempt to form pacts on both sides of the Brexit divide, so a sort of Leavers pact and a Remainers pact, but they're both fraught with difficulty.
Yes, it's the attempt to form pact, the failure to form pact, and the possibility that the voters will have got the signal and worked out what to do anyway.
Right, OK, so shall we start with the Leave side,
Yep.
which Nigel Farage, leader of the Brexit Party, has called his unofficial Leave Alliance.
Unilateral
But
Leave.
Unilateral Leave Alliance, excuse me, and is only partial, right?
Someone said this was rather like Emma Watson's announcement that she was self-partnering as opposed to single. Nigel Farage, apparently without any quid pro quo from the Conservative Party, announced that he was pulling the Brexit Party out of the 317 seats that the Conservatives already control, which is a pretty big concession. One of the pollsters, Matthew Goodwin, said he reckoned there were about 35 seats where that could make a real difference to the Conservatives.
Okay.
35 marginal seats.
So that could be 35 seats that the Tories would retain
Exactly.
as their territory,
Exactly.
rather than 35 gains, crucially.
Yeah, places where the Leave vote might not be as split. There's been quite a lot of briefing from the Brexit Party side about all the conversations they may or may not have had with Downing Street in order to get this deal. Certainly by Farage's demeanour, one has to conclude that he's not completely happy whatever conversations took place. He has, however, said that he's going to stand in the 300-odd other seats of Great Britain, primarily held by the Labour Party, some by the Lib Dems and the SNP, and Black Cymru, of course, and he's going to contest all of those seats. So actually it's a fairly partial concession. It's a big deal in the Tory seats, but the fact is, in the seats the Conservative Party needs to win to take this election, they're going to face a Brexit Party challenge, at least in theory and at least on paper.
OK, so what I've attempted to do here, very badly, is not draw a snowman, but to try and do a sort of, I mean, a very loose description and Venn diagram of the Leave. What did he call it? Unilateral
Leave Alliance.
Unilateral Leave Alliance. OK, so let's just call it Leave.
Yes.
OK. Should we also have a sort of Labour-held seats bit of this?
Yeah, we should,
We should. OK, right. Oh, does that work? Maybe.
It's going to have to, isn't it?
OK. So let's plot what happens here then. So these seats where the Brexit Party and the Conservatives were going to be head-to-head, do they just happily go into the kind of Tory column?
The one assumption that we all make when we talk about pacts is to very arrogantly assume that everybody's vote can just be handed over, that Nigel Farage has just gifted all the Brexit Party votes in the Conservatives to them. And of course it's not like that, because if those people wanted to vote Conservative, they'd have voted Conservative. And some of these numbers are quite small, and when you get down to around 1,000, 2,000 people, you begin to think they hold their views quite strongly. And so the fact they didn't jump for Theresa May last time suggests that maybe they won't jump this time. And of course, some of the Brexit Party vote, as he's always maintained, are people who are actually Labour supporters who've gone to the Brexit Party but can't bring themselves to go to the Conservatives.
So they might be here.
That's right. Again, estimates suggest that Labour loses one vote to the Brexit Party for every two that the Conservatives lose. That will change, of course, now that the Conservative seats are not in play. So he will take votes from Labour as well, which can help the Conservatives in lots of places where it pulls down the Labour vote without hurting the Conservatives.
So there's some sort of seats in this sort of area. I mean, how many votes and how many seats though can a Farage party really take from Labour? Do we think? Well, can they win any? I mean, we've talked about Hartlepool. That would be a possibility, but you know, one or two seats, or even if that, because it's about concentrating the vote in one seat, because the first past the post is such a tricky system.
Instinct tells me they won't take any.
Yeah.
I wouldn't be shocked if they took one or two. It will slightly depend, and this is where we're still trying to work out what's going on under the hood, whether the Conservatives have actually quietly decided not to bother in a few places and give them a bit of a clear run. I think one of the really interesting seats is Peterborough, where the Brexit Party is very, very strong, and which used to be held by the Conservatives once upon a time. The split between the Brexit Party and the Conservative Party could easily keep Labour in charge of that seat. So I think most of the time this challenge won't matter too much unless it's in a place where voters are genuinely confused. What
Yeah.
is the better Leave option? Some of those will be very, very fiercely fought. But, you know, I think actually Nigel Farage has sent a subliminal signal to voters by pulling out of the Tory seats, which is actually saying, look, only the Tories can win this election. So I think even in the Labour seats he's still contesting, in most places, voters will have got the message that if Brexit's your number one concern, you probably ought to vote for the Conservative Party.
Well, actually, I would say it's been notable how uncomfortable Nigel Farage has been over the last few days. He's got pressure on both sides, people inside the Brexit Party who want them to stand firm. There are some sort of rebel candidates even in these Conservative-facing seats who are standing anyway. There's a guy in Clacton-on-Sea who's changed his name so that he can register as a sort of independent Brexit Party candidate in rebellion against Farage's unilateral deal. So there is going to be all sorts of people who feel, as you rightly said, that a party can't gift its voters to another party. And I think that becomes really significant when you look at the other side of the coin, the Remain alliance.
This is one of the points. The other point you have to remember is that Nigel Farage, love him or hate him, is a significant political figure, a significant political strategist who is capable of seeing the bigger picture. A lot of his followers are not, and so they've bought into the rhetoric of smashing the political system and getting these corrupt parties out, and we're going to change everything. And so suddenly to be marched down the hill again is very, very difficult for them and some of their followers.
And once you've created a political organisation, you know, you've won the European elections with a record number of MEPs. You know, you now have a political organisation. What are you going to do with all those people? And they're all fired up now, and you've told them there's a fight to be fought. I mean, do feel free to use the pens, of course, Robert, if you want to draw a little Nigel Farage, because I notice you're a bit backward in coming forward on the drawing.
There is a reason for that. You know, there is, although after Workington Man the other day, maybe I'm prepared to have a go. What I need, I think a little pair of red trousers for Nigel Farage.
OK, that's nice.
Maybe a nice blue jacket.
And are you putting him in the Conservative area? Because the other day he was forced to deny that he would himself be voting for the Conservative Party.
No, I put him in the Conservative area because I didn't think about it
Right,
sufficiently at the time
fine.
I started drawing.
OK, let's try and do the other side then. Let's try and do... No, it's fine. Let's try and do the so-called Remain alliance. Now, one of the problems I'm going to have drawing the Remain alliance is that the Labour Party... well, there's a limited Remain alliance. Let's stick with what we know.
Dots and then
Let's stick with what we know. OK, we've got the Green Party, we've got Plaid Cymru, the Welsh Nationalists, and we've got the Lib Dems. We've also got like tiny little parties like Renew, who are a very pro Remain party, who also are now sort of jumping on board. But there's a huge problem with the Remain alliance, which is where's the Labour Party not
SNP
participating?
Are not in it.
Yes, they're not in it. That's true. OK, what should we do for the SNP? Should we just put Labour and the SNP completely separately, and then we can discuss? OK, go for it.
So the key point about the Remain alliance parties is that they are almost all in a roughly similar place. They all absolutely hate Brexit. They're absolutely competing for core Remainer votes.
They're pure Remain.
Pure Remain, exactly.
Yeah.
I mean, which, to be fair, the SNP is as well. But the SNP doesn't see any great need to go into alliance because the SNP thinks it's going to do very well in Scotland anyway.
And it has another priority.
Exactly. And also, that other priority of Scottish independence certainly jars with the Liberal Democrats. So that makes it more difficult for them. The Labour Party is much more complicated. First of all, obviously, it's trying to tread a line and not be completely Remain. It wants to keep its Leave voters, those people up there who are being targeted, by saying we are still going to negotiate a Brexit deal and we're going to put it to the public. So that's its nuanced position. So it's not a Remain party, which obviously precludes it from being in the Remain alliance. Secondly, the party with whom it would most benefit from any kind of agreement, which is the Liberal Democrats, doesn't like it. You know, first of all, it's taken on a load of ex-Labour people who left the Labour Party because they hate Jeremy Corbyn so much.
Correct.
Joe Swinson, the Liberal Democrat leader, is no great fan of his either. And so the problem is they are finding it very hard to reach any kind of agreement, much to the fury of Remainers who are desperately trying to make one happen and who are trying to urge much more tactical voting and on-the-ground arrangements. But it's a massive problem for the Labour Party, this.
So on the ground, there has been a lot of ill feeling and some really serious local rows.
Yeah.
The Lib Dem candidate in Canterbury, which is a very, very slim Labour hold at the moment, they took it in 2017, unilaterally, again, decided to stand down. Lib Dem HQ insisted they would put another candidate in place, cue horror from Labour Remainers. But of course, Labour's not saying that they would stand down in favour of any of these other parties. Actually, interestingly, in Scotland, there are a couple of Greens who've said they'll stand down for the SNP because the Greens are also in favour of Scottish independence. So they don't mind about the SNP's other priorities. We should also... OK, we can move on to Northern Ireland.
Canterbury's an interesting case because it's very, very tight, Labour Conservative, just held by Rosie Duff with 180 votes or something in it.
Yeah.
Lib Dem's absolutely nowhere, but if they're doing well, it could make the difference. So
I'm going to write grrr.
I mean, I do think
because
that when the Lib Dem vote gets
Yeah.
quite low, you're probably, as I said, only talking about people who wanted to vote Lib Dem, so they may not go to the Labour Party in the first place. It's also possible, of course, that Lib Dems would have taken votes from the Conservatives. So standing down may not actually help the Labour Party, although logic suggests it does.
So here's the thing. Standing aside for other parties, which has happened in this...
Yeah.
I mean, we're saying quite limited way. It's still 60 seats. It may only affect the result, you know, in single figures, but that's not nothing in a potential hung parliament scenario. But actually standing down is not the only way to try and influence your voters to move across to another column, right? It's partly, as you were saying, it's this signal. If you send this signal, and even in the seats where you're not standing down, you're saying, you know, you can treat our votes in this particular election, even if long-term, as slightly interchangeable. Yeah. That's something that the Labour Party doesn't really want to do and the Lib Dems don't really want to do because they're playing a longer game.
That's right. But also because even though Brexit is dominating this election, it's not the only issue. And for the Liberal Democrats, for Jo Swinson, whose primary targets are Conservative-held seats, promising not to put Labour in power is really, really important. I mean, leaving aside what she actually thinks about it, Conservative voters are frightened of Jeremy... Conservative-minded voters are frightened of Jeremy Corbyn. He's keeping people from the Labour Party. So...
Well, also, Labour defectors from the Labour Party and voters of the same mind as, for example, Luciana Berger and Chuka Umunna also don't want to have anything to do with Corbyn. So it's not just Tory voters.
And I think, I mean, Jo Swinson's in a fix on this because... In a sense, if you're saying, as she does, you know, she's clearly not going to put Boris Johnson in power. She's not going to put Jeremy Corbyn in power. In an interview with us today, she said she'd rather force another election. I mean, she's still given us a tiny bit of wiggle room.
Yeah. But, hooray, another election,
So at some point, a reasonable voter might say, why exactly am I voting for you if I don't think you're going to win? But she has made the decision, probably correctly, that says, I cannot be seen to be someone who will put Jeremy Corbyn in power because I will lose the Conservative Remainer votes that I'm primarily targeting. So that's the other point about these Remain alliances, is there's other factors in play, as you said. Yeah.
So the other thing that's been going on, sort of very much beneath the radar, but potentially quite important in that hung parliament scenario because it affects what alliances either the Tory party or the Labour Party can make in order to govern after December the 13th. There's also Northern Ireland. Can I just... Yeah. I really want to talk about Northern Ireland. Yeah.
Can't.
OK.
Standing there. There's only one teaser, which is that the other thing to note about the two big players in the virtual alliance is that they are beginning to see their votes ticking up. And the gap between Labour and the Conservatives and the Brexit Party and the Lib Dems is widening because... Just the talk about this helps the two big parties because voters, the one thing voters absolutely do understand is that it's always been a two-party system and that there are only two people who could likely be Prime Minister. And so all this talk about tactical alliances is helping the big parties squeeze the smaller ones.
So actually, there's also a really interesting
you want
point
to
of...
now.
Yeah, but you've distracted me with something that's actually interesting, which is the point of principle. There are actually some people who don't like parties to stand down for each other because they feel that, you know, this is supposed to be a democratic competition. It's a competition of ideas, of leadership styles, as you've said, who's going to be the next Prime Minister. And actually standing down is a fix and stitches up the voters. What do you think about that? Because I actually think that that's right. I actually would prefer situations in which everybody was offered a slate of candidates, but you can signal to voters how they can use their vote as a token if they feel more strongly about Brexit than something else, for example.
I have a lot of sympathy for that view, and I think, whatever the failings of the British electoral system, voters do understand it. And they know what they're doing if they choose not to vote for one of the two big parties. They understand that in most places that vote will not ultimately count. But it's what they believe, it's what they feel, and they think, well, actually, this is who I am, and I'm voting for this party. So,
OK, what I wanted to say about Northern Ireland was just this, which is that obviously the Conservative Party has... I've just done DUP in green. I can't do that. I better do it in orange. The Conservative Party has only been able to govern since the 20... that's right. The Conservative Party has only been able to govern for the last 2 years with the help of the DUP and their 10 MPs. But there is also a slightly odd Remain alliance in Northern Ireland, which could deprive the DUP of 2 or 3 seats.
Yeah.
So that, again, and I should just explain what it is. It's the SDLP, Sinn Féin, who don't actually formally take their seats in the... No, but plus Alliance, which is a non-sectarian party, and they are helping each other potentially deprive the Unionists of 3 seats.
Yeah, although actually it's slightly because I think it's the Alliance is not standing aside for them in the way that they are for the Alliance.
It's a tiny party, though.
No, but in one of the 3 seats they're targeting, which I think is South Belfast, the SDLP and the Alliance are fairly close together. And so if voters don't understand which way they're going, that could lead the DUP. But I think...
So it could be another split vote.
It could be, yes. I think
situation.
You could pick the right one. I mean, it's very interesting. But I mean, then again, you wonder how this will play out. Because, so, for example, in North Belfast, which is Nigel Dodds' seat, he's the leader of the DUP in the UK Parliament, he's going to be run quite hard by Sinn Féin. In fact, their candidate, John Finucane, who is the son of the murdered lawyer, Pat Finucane. And that's really, really close. But the other issue that people have to think about when they do this is, well, if it's Sinn Féin, you're not actually voting for an MP who's going to be in the British Parliament. I think that's difficult. I think Sinn Féin refused to say this. At the moment, it's 7 MPs who don't turn up. If they did, it would more or less cancel out the help the DUP gave to the Conservatives. So electing Sinn Féin in a DUP seat is silencing yourself in the Westminster Parliament. And that's a tricky one, I think, for a seat which isn't inherently nationalist.
Interesting, though, just from the politics point of view, that the reason they're giving for cooperating with each other is the Brexit issue, that they are Remainers, and they feel that the excessive influence of the DUP over the Conservatives in the last 2 years has pushed us to where we are. So it's an attempt through a pact to counteract that weighting on the Brexit argument.
I mean, looking at the numbers, I think there's only one... my guess is there's only one place where it will make a difference, unless the Alliance and SDLP can sort out their problems.
All right,
but
I'll tone it down a bit then.
Nonetheless, it could take away the leader of the DUP. It could send a very nasty signal. And I think, isn't there a 4th seat held by the Ulster Unionists they've also been stepping aside for? So, again, it has the potential to make a small difference in Westminster, but I think it has the potential to make a major difference in Northern Ireland, where this kind of cooperation could be really significant. Also bring the SDLP back into Parliament, where they aren't at the moment, I believe. So,
can I ask you a Scotland question, though? Okay. Because this Leave alliance here, we've talked about the SNP and the Greens as the kind of Remain Scottish separatist side of it, but there is something quite interesting here about the Brexit Party saying they'll not fight Conservatives in Conservative incumbent seats, because the Tories currently have a quite healthy 13 Scottish seats. Surely it really does help the the Conservative Party in Scotland, because they can now be the Leave vote in Scotland, which is 38% of the Scots voted to leave, which gets left out of the conversation quite a lot.
It may very well help, though I think the other dynamic, which is so strong in Scotland, which is the independence dynamic, is as big a factor in seats. So it's also establishing yourself as the main voice of unionism in any specific seat, standing against one of the seats where the Liberals are going to push forward in that way.
Yeah, that's right. Charles Kennedy's old seat on the very beautiful west coast of Scotland, it said that in the way that we were discussing earlier, the Labour Party and the Tory Party are standing candidates, but they're not putting any effort in because it looks like the Lib Dems, it's a Lib Dem versus SNP fight there to see whether they can retake the seat. So I think it's going to be really interesting whether over the next few weeks you get much more of that informal agreement to get out of the way and give a party a clear run rather than more formal alliances.
I think it's, and I mean, it could make a huge difference because I think the psychological difference of the SNP making some gains but still being in the 40s or sweeping the board and getting up into the 50s is really meaningful, particularly given the pressure they're talking about putting on Jeremy Corbyn if he's in a position to form a coalition, saying you've got to give us another referendum and you've got to give it to us fast. So there's quite a lot to play for there as well. OK,
well, I think we've done our job, but I think I should do a sort of T&Cs section or a kind of disclaimer, which is that obviously it's not to scale. It's not statistically to scale, because otherwise the Labour Party balloon and the Conservative balloon would be enormous and everyone else would look very small indeed.